Hi guys, welcome to Nightfall Chronicles Channel. Tonight, beneath a sky stitched with quiet stars, there is a forge that no longer rings with steel, but with something far softer and rarer. In a small village where hammers once shaped swords, a blacksmith now mends what cannot be held in the hand: broken hopes, restless memories, and dreams worn thin by the day. This is a story about listening flames, gentle hands, and the courage it takes to repair what the world forgets. If you're joining us from the U.S., as evening settles in, from Europe as midnight drifts closer, from Canada, Australia, or anywhere else in the world, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now in the comments. If these quiet stories help you unwind, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts below. Your presence here keeps this circle of calm glowing. Now, get comfortable. Let your shoulders soften. Slow your breath. Allow the day to loosen its grip as we return to the soft glow of the forge, where the night listens and the story begins. The forge sat at the edge of the village, where the cobbled road thinned into a ribbon of dust and the fields opened their arms to the dark. Long ago sparks had leapt from its doorway like fireflies, startled into flight, and the clangor of iron had echoed through mornings and afternoons alike. But tonight the forge breathed differently. The fire was low and patient, a banked ember glow that hummed rather than roared, warming the stone walls with a steady, intimate heat. Inside, the air smelled of old charcoal and lavender, an odd pairing that had become the blacksmith's signature. He kept bundles of dried flowers hung beside tongs and bellows because harsh scents had a way of waking sharp thoughts, and sharp thoughts did not belong here anymore. He had learned that when the mind softened, the hands followed. The blacksmith himself moved with a careful slowness, as though time were a stream he waded through rather than crossed. His hair had gone the color of ash, and his arms bore the quiet strength of years spent lifting weight and then setting it down again. Tonight he wiped his anvil clean, not because it needed it, but because the ritual mattered. Clean surfaces invited gentler work. A bell chimed outside, soft, wind-brushed, not the village bell, but a small one tied to the doorframe. It rang only when someone approached with hesitation. The blacksmith closed his eyes for a moment, listening. The fire answered with a subtle crackle, as if clearing its throat. When the door opened, the night slipped in, cool and blue. A figure stood in the doorway, their outline uncertain, as though the darkness itself had taken a step forward. They did not speak. They rarely did, not at first. The blacksmith nodded, the kind of nod that said, "You're welcome to sit. You're welcome to take your time." He set a kettle over the embers and poured water that sang as it warmed. Cups were placed on the bench, simple clay, chipped and beloved. The visitor's shoulders eased as the steam rose, carrying lavender into the room. It always worked like that. Not a spell, exactly. More like permission. "Tell me," the blacksmith said at last, his voice low and steady, "what needs mending tonight?" The visitor's answer came not in words, but in a small object set gently on the anvil. It looked like a shard of glass at first glance, but it caught the firelight in a way glass never could. Within it swirled faint images, unfinished paths, faces half remembered, a sunrise that had stopped just before breaking. A dream cracked along its edge. The blacksmith leaned closer, eyes kind. He did not reach for his hammer. He never did any more. Instead, he breathed with the fire, waited for the right warmth, and began the work that could not be rushed. The blacksmith lifted the shard with 2 fingers, careful not to press, as if pressure alone might widen the fracture. He held it above the coals, not close enough to scorch, but near enough to invite the warmth to speak. The embers responded with a deeper glow, orange slipping toward gold, the color of late afternoons that refused to hurry into night. He listened, not with his ears alone, but with the quiet attention he had practiced for years. Embers had a language, soft ticks and sighs, the smallest sounds that only revealed themselves when the room was still. In those sounds, he heard the story trying to remember itself. The visitor wrapped both hands around the clay cup, breathing in steam. Their fingers trembled, just slightly, the way leaves do before rain. The blacksmith noticed, as he noticed everything, but he did not comment. Dreams did not like to be stared at. They preferred to be witnessed. From a shelf he took a thin rod of dull silver, no longer sharp, its edges worn smooth by time. He warmed it slowly, rotating it with patience until it glowed like moonlight caught in metal. When he touched it to the cracked edge of the dream, the room exhaled. Not a sound exactly, more a sensation, like a tension letting go. The crack softened. Not sealed yet, but no longer angry. The images inside the shard slowed, their frantic motion easing into something like a gentle drift. A face within the dream turned toward a sunrise that waited, patient and kind. "You don't force these things," the blacksmith murmured, more to the fire than the visitor. "You remind them what they were meant to become." Outside, the wind brushed the fields, bending grass in slow waves. The night leaned closer to the forge, curious. Somewhere far away a dog barked once, then fell silent, as if remembering it was late. The visitor's shoulders lowered another inch. Their breath found a rhythm that matched the bellows, rising and falling, slow and even. The blacksmith worked on, tracing the fracture again and again, not closing it yet, only teaching it how to rest. When at last he set the shard down on a bed of warm sand, it no longer looked broken. It looked paused, as if the dream had curled up to sleep before continuing. "This will take time," he said gently. "But time is something we have here." The fire agreed, settling into a low, steady glow that promised patience. The blacksmith stepped away from the anvil and washed his hands in a basin of warm water, watching soot loosen and drift like tiny shadows. He always did this between steps, not to clean, but to reset. Water, like fire, had its own way of listening. It carried away what did not belong to the next moment. The visitor finally spoke, their voice thin at first, as though it had been folded away for a long time. "It stopped," they said. "The dream, right when it mattered." The blacksmith nodded without looking up. He dried his hands on a linen cloth that smelled faintly of sun. "Most do," he replied. "They pause when the heart is tired." He returned to the bench and opened a small wooden box. Inside lay objects no one else would recognize as tools, a feather dulled with age, a ring of driftwood polished smooth, a spool of thread that shimmered faintly, as if woven from dusk itself. He chose the thread. As he unwound it, the visitor's words found more room to exist. They spoke of days spent choosing safety over longing, of conversations ended early, of letters never sent. Each sentence was set down like a stone, placed carefully beside the path, not to block it, but to mark where they had been. The dream shard, resting in the warm sand, stirred. Its images shifted, revealing a road that bent away from a familiar door. The blacksmith guided the thread along the softened crack, not stitching, not binding, Simply laying it there, a reminder that connection did not have to be tight to be true. The fire dimmed a fraction, as if leaning in to hear better. Shadows along the walls deepened, becoming gentle shapes rather than sharp edges. The forge felt smaller now, cozier, like a pocket of warmth held in cupped hands. Unsaid things, the blacksmith said softly, are heavy only when we carry them alone. He touched the thread to the ember glow, sealing nothing, promising nothing, only acknowledging. The dream's images slowed further. A letter appeared, no longer blank. Words did not write themselves, but the page waited without judgment. When the visitor fell quiet, the silence did not feel empty. It felt complete. Outside, the bell on the door chimed once, though no one touched it. The night, it seemed, was turning a page. In a corner of the forge, hanging from a peg, worn smooth by decades of use, was the hammer. It had not been lifted in a long time. Its handle bore the dark sheen of countless mornings, and its head was nicked with the history of iron shaped under brighter, harsher days. Tonight it swayed slightly as the air shifted, a slow, thoughtful motion, like a memory stretching. The blacksmith noticed. He always did. He crossed the room and rested his palm against the hammer's handle. It was warm, not from the fire, but from familiarity. For a moment he remembered the old rhythm, the ringing blows, the sparks that leapt and stung, the certainty of metal yielding under force. Weapons had once left this forge straight and sharp, confident in their purpose. He exhaled, and the memory loosened its hold. "When I stopped using you," he said quietly, "it wasn't because you failed me." The visitor watched from the bench, eyes heavy-lidded now, their breathing slow and even. The words were not meant for them alone. The forge itself listened. The blacksmith lifted the hammer just enough to feel its weight, then set it back down on the anvil without striking. The sound was a soft thump, more heartbeat than blow. The fire responded by lowering its flame, settling into a glow that felt like approval. "I learned," he continued, "that some things don't need to be fixed by force. Some things only need a place to rest." He returned to the dream shard, still cradled in warm sand, and adjusted its position so the firelight brushed it evenly. The images within had grown clearer, not brighter, but calmer. A doorway stood open now, no longer looming, simply present. The hammer remained still, content in its place, no longer aching for motion. The blacksmith's hands moved without urgency, shaping the night into something safe and unhurried. Outside, the village slept. Chimneys cooled. Windows reflected starlight like closed eyes dreaming gently. Inside the forge, nothing was struck, and yet something was changing. The blacksmith sat on a low stool and let his weight sink into it the way one settles into a familiar story. For a time, he said nothing. The fire murmured. The kettle clicked softly as it cooled. The night held its breath, curious. "The first dream," he began at last, "was my own." The visitor lifted their gaze, but the blacksmith did not look back. His eyes were on the embers, on a memory that glowed faintly and refused to fade. "It broke the day I learned how easily iron can end a life," he said, voice steady but distant. "I had forged a blade that morning, clean, balanced, beautiful." By evening, the village rang with grief. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small bent nail, rusted, useless by any practical measure. He turned it between his fingers as if it were a talisman. "I couldn't melt it away," he continued. "I tried. I thought if I destroyed every tool I'd ever made, the dream might forgive me." He smiled, thin and gentle. But dreams don't ask for erasure. They ask for care. He set the nail beside the dream shard. The two seemed to recognize each other, both bearing marks of strain, both still here. The fire leaned closer, offering warmth without heat. That night, he said, I sat where you sit now. I waited. And in the waiting, the dream changed. The visitor felt it then, a soft pressure behind the eyes, the kind that comes before sleep. The forge seemed to drift, edges blurring just enough to be kind. The dream shard pulsed once, a slow, reassuring beat. The blacksmith covered it with a thin cloth, allowing it to rest. Rest, he whispered, to the shard, to the nail, to the memory itself. Outside, dawn was far away. There was no need to hurry toward it. Names had weight in the forge, the blacksmith believed. Spoken too loudly, they could wake old fears. Left unspoken, they could grow heavy with loneliness. So he waited, letting the night choose its moment. The visitor shifted on the bench, the movement slow and careful, like someone adjusting in half-sleep. The clay cup had cooled in their hands, but they did not seem to notice. Their eyes traced the lines in the wooden floor, grooves worn by decades of patient footsteps. "My name," they said at last, almost surprised by the sound of it, "is Ailin." The blacksmith nodded, tasting the name as if it were a familiar spice. "Welcome, Ailin," he replied, and with the saying of it, the forge seemed to soften further, as though it had been waiting for that small truth. Ailin watched as he lifted the cloth from the dream shard. The images within shifted again, responding to recognition. A face appeared more clearly now, Ailin's own, though younger, standing at the edge of something vast and unafraid. "I don't remember feeling like that," Ailin whispered. "You do," the blacksmith said gently. "You just remember the road after." He placed the shard closer to the fire, adjusting the bellows with a single, careful breath. The embers brightened just enough to coax, not command. The scent of lavender deepened, threading through the warmth like a lullaby. Ailin's eyelids grew heavy. The name, once a burden, now felt like a blanket drawn up to the chin. The blacksmith worked in silence, honoring the moment when a dream and its dreamer begin to recognize each other again. Outside, the stars wheeled slowly, unbothered by time. The forge grew quieter still, the kind of quiet that feels padded, as though the world has wrapped itself in wool. Ailin's breathing settled into a deep, even rhythm, each inhale a little longer than the last. The blacksmith noticed the shift and smiled to himself. This was often when dreams leaned closest. He turned the shard with a wooden spoon, never metal, never bare hand. The images within rotated like constellations, slowly changing their place in the sky. The doorway Ailin had seen before stood at the center now, wide, unadorned, neither inviting nor forbidding. It simply waited. "Doors that rush you," the blacksmith murmured, "usually lead to places you're not ready to be." He brushed a pinch of fine ash around the shard, forming a thin circle that glimmered faintly in the firelight. Not a boundary, a reminder. Within that circle, nothing was required. Ailin's head tipped back against the wall. For a moment their brow creased as if an old worry had stirred. The blacksmith responded not with words, but by lowering the flame. The embers dimmed, the room cooled just enough to reassure the body that rest was safe. The doorway in the shard softened at its edges. Beyond it, there was no sudden brightness, no demand to step through. Only a path that curved gently, like a river choosing its way downhill. Outside, a cloud passed over the moon, deepening the night. Inside, the forge held its gentle vigil, allowing the dream to learn patience again. The blacksmith stepped to the doorway and opened it just a little, enough to let the night breathe into the room. Cool air slid across the floor, touching the warm stones with a soft sigh. Somewhere beyond the fields an owl called once, then listened for its echo. He loved this moment most, the meeting of warmth and cool when nothing had to win. From a shelf he took down a shallow tray of water and placed it near the anvil. He did not submerge anything. He only let the heat of the room kiss the surface. The water answered with the faintest hiss, a sound so soft it barely existed, the sound of cooling metal without metal, of release without loss. Elin stirred, eyes still closed. Their hands unclenched, the lines of worry around their mouth eased as if they had remembered how to be unguarded. The blacksmith returned to the shard and watched the images settle further. The path beyond the doorway was clearer now, edged with grasses that bent in a friendly way. No footprints marked it. No expectations followed it. It was simply there. He lowered himself onto the stool again, matching his breath to Elin's, to the fires, to the quiet pulse of the night. This was how repairs finished, not with a final strike, but with a shared stillness. Outside, the village slept on, unaware that a dream was finding its way back to itself. The fire had been burning in this forge longer than the blacksmith could remember. Not the same flames, of course, but the same patient presence, fed, banked, and trusted across generations. He believed fire remembered things not as stories, but as feelings, urgency, sorrow, relief, peace. Tonight the fire remembered gentleness. He reached into the coals with a long-handled rake and shifted them slightly, opening a pocket of deeper glow. The embers pulsed, and the shard answered with a soft internal light. Within it, the images slowed until they felt almost suspended, like leaves floating on still water. Elin's breathing deepened further, the kind that belongs to the borderland between waking and sleep. The blacksmith spoke quietly, not to wake them, but to give the dream something to lean toward. "Once," he said, "people brought me broken swords. They wanted them made stronger." He paused, letting the fire crackle gently. "Now they bring me broken knights. They want them made kinder." The shard warmed, not hot, never hot. The crack, once sharp and bright, had softened into a seam, a place of joining rather than splitting. The blacksmith smiled, a small private smile. Outside, the stars shifted imperceptibly. Inside, the forge held its breath, honoring the moment when a dream remembers it does not need to be perfect to be whole. There was a moment in every night the blacksmith knew well, the deep middle, when time seemed to fold in on itself and the world rested in a balanced hush. Not evening, not morning, just the long, dark pause where even worries grew tired. This was that moment. The forge felt suspended as if floating on a quiet sea. Shadows lay still against the walls. The kettle had gone completely silent. Even the bell on the door rested, unmoving. The blacksmith adjusted the cloth over the shard, leaving it half covered, half seeing. Dreams, he had learned, liked to feel protected without being hidden. Beneath the fabric, the images held steady, the doorway, the path, the unhurried sky beyond. Elin slept now, not the shallow sleep of exhaustion, but the deeper kind that carries trust. Their face was smooth, their jaw unclenched, their breath slow enough to count without effort. The blacksmith counted anyway, 1, 2, 3, matching his own breath to the rhythm. He leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the long night breathe around him. This was the work, not the tools, not the rituals, but the willingness to remain present when nothing seemed to be happening. Outside, somewhere far away, the first hint of dawn waited patiently, not yet ready to arrive. As the night held steady, something subtle shifted, not in the forge, not in the fire, but within the dream itself. The blacksmith sensed it the way one senses a change in weather while still indoors. He lifted the cloth completely. The shard no longer looked like a fragment. Its edges had rounded, softened by warmth and time. The seam where the crack had been was still visible, but it no longer interrupted the flow of images. Instead, it guided them, like a riverbank shaping water without resisting it. The doorway within the dream stood open now, not wider, not brighter, simply open. Beyond it, the path curved through tall grass that whispered in a wind too gentle to be felt. Above, the sky was neither night nor day, but something peaceful in between. The blacksmith did not touch the shard. This part, he knew, belonged to the dream alone. Elin stirred, a faint smile touching their lips, as if they had reached a place they recognized without remembering why. Their hands rested open at their sides, palms up, the universal sign of ease. The fire dimmed further, embers glowing like sleepy eyes. The forge seemed to lean inward, protective and warm. "Go as slowly as you like," the blacksmith whispered, not to Elin, but to the dream itself. The shard glowed once, soft and steady, as if answering. The blacksmith remained still, yet his thoughts drifted, carried gently by the quiet. Not every memory rested easily, even here. There were some things, some moments, that had come to his forge and left unchanged. He remembered one in particular. A woman had arrived years ago with nothing in her hands and everything in her eyes. She had not asked for repair. She had asked for forgetting. Her grief had been sharp, immediate, like metal fresh from the fire. He had listened. He had warmed the embers. He had waited. But forgetting had never been part of his craft. He had told her so softly, and she had wept, not loudly, but with the kind of tears that fall inward. When she left, the bell on the door had not rung at all. The memory passed like a shadow, acknowledged and released. The blacksmith returned his attention to the present. Elin slept peacefully. The dream glowed with a calm certainty. This time, repair was possible, not by erasing the seam, but by honoring it. He adjusted the fire one last time, ensuring it would not wake them too soon. The forge settled again into its patient watch. Outside, the night remained deep and kind. A pale shift touched the edge of the sky, so faint it could only be felt, not seen. The blacksmith sensed it the way he sensed the fire's moods, a loosening, a gentle turning of the world toward what came next. Inside the forge, nothing rushed to meet it. Elin slept on, wrapped in the deep quiet of the long night's end. The shard rested on the anvil now, no longer needing the sand's warmth. It held together on its own, whole in a way that did not deny its past. The blacksmith brewed fresh tea, the leaves unfurling slowly, releasing a scent like wet earth after rain. He poured 2 cups and set one near Elin's hand, close enough to be found when waking arrived naturally. The fire had nearly gone out, leaving a bed of soft ash and a few glowing coals that pulsed like a gentle heartbeat. The forge felt lighter, as though it had set something down. Outside, birds had not yet begun their chorus. The morning waited, respectful. Elin stirred as if surfacing from warm water, slow and unafraid. Their eyes opened gradually, taking in the low light, the stone walls, the quiet presence of the blacksmith seated nearby. For a moment, they did not move at all, testing the stillness, ensuring it would hold. It did. They sat up, rubbing sleep from their eyes, and noticed the tea waiting for them. Steam rose in a thin, patient line. Elin smiled, not wide, not startled, just enough to acknowledge gratitude without words. "I didn't fall apart," they said softly, as if surprised. The blacksmith shook his head. "You rested," he replied. "There's a difference." Elin's gaze found the shard on the anvil. It looked different now, no longer fragile, no longer demanding attention. It seemed content to exist, catching the dim morning light and holding it gently. "I thought I'd have to leave it here," Elin said. "You can," the blacksmith answered, "or you can carry it with you. Dreams know how to travel once they remember their shape." Elin lifted the shard. It was warm, but not hot, solid, but light. It fit their hand as if it always had. Outside, the sky brightened another shade, still quiet, still unhurried. Elin stood in the doorway of the forge, the shard tucked safely into a small cloth pouch the blacksmith had given them. The bell above the frame caught the faintest breeze and chimed once, clear, gentle, awake. Beyond the threshold, the road waited. Not the same road Elin had arrived on, though it traced a familiar path. Morning mist clung low to the ground, softening edges, turning fields into quiet seas of pale silver. The world looked newly rinsed. "You don't have to hurry," the blacksmith said from behind them. He did not step forward. Goodbyes, he knew, needed space. Elin nodded, feeling the weight of the pouch, not heavy, not light, just present. "I won't," they replied. They took one step, then another, each footfall slow and deliberate. With every step, the night's tightness loosened a little more, replaced by something steadier, something that did not ask for proof. The forge door closed softly behind them, not shutting out, not locking in, simply resting. Inside, the blacksmith returned to his stool and listened to the morning grow. The forge felt different once Elin was gone, not emptier, just quieter in a new way, like a room after music has ended, but the melody still lingers in the walls. The blacksmith sat with his hands resting on his knees, letting that quiet settle into him. He did not rush to tidy. He never did. Order returned on its own, gently when it was ready. The anvil held a faint warmth where the shard had rested, a memory of contact that would fade slowly. He placed his palm there, feeling the echo. Some repairs left marks you could not see, only sense, a calm where tension used to live. Outside, the village began to stir. A shutter creaked open. Somewhere a kettle was set on a hearth. These sounds arrived softly, respectful, of the night that had just passed. The blacksmith rose and opened the forge door fully, inviting the morning in. Pale light slipped across the stone floor, touching old tools, the rusting hammer, the lavender bundles. Nothing needed changing. Everything was exactly where it belonged. He breathed once, deep and unhurried, and prepared for whoever or whatever might come next. By the time the sun cleared the low hills, the village had fully woken, though few remembered when sleep had left them. Doors opened, footsteps crossed stone, voices greeted one another with the familiar ease of people who shared weather and years. And yet almost no one thought of the forge. They passed it as they always had, children tugging sleeves, elders leaning on canes, merchants counting small coins in their pockets. The building stood quietly at the road's edge, smoke no longer curling urgently from its chimney, its door neither inviting nor closed, just there. The blacksmith watched them with a fond, distant patience. He knew their rhythms, their worries, the small dreams they carried without naming. Some would arrive tonight, some would wait weeks. Some would never realize what they were missing until the ache grew gentle enough to follow. He swept the floor slowly, the broom whispering against stone. Dust lifted, then settled again, unbothered. Even the act of cleaning felt like listening. Outside, Elon's footsteps had long faded into the morning. Inside, the forge held its readiness, not sharp, not expectant, simply open. The fire slept beneath its ash, waiting for the moment it would be needed again. Mid-morning drifted in without ceremony. Sunlight slid across the forge floor in a slow rectangle that inched forward, patient as a thought unfolding. The blacksmith moved within it, then out of it, unconcerned with where the light chose to linger. This hour was often empty. Not lonely, just unclaimed. He set a loaf of bread on the bench and cut it into thick, uneven slices. Crumbs scattered like small constellations. He ate slowly, tasting the grain, the warmth left from the oven it had come from. Between bites he listened, not for footsteps, not for the bell, for the softer things, the settling of wood, the hush of ash, the distant murmur of fields breathing under the sun. Sometimes, in this quiet, the forge spoke back, a sigh from the rafters, a tick from cooling stone, the faint, familiar weight of the hammer resting without purpose. The blacksmith acknowledged each sound with a nod, as if greeting old friends who preferred silence to talk. He took down a small ledger, its pages thick, its cover worn, and opened it to a blank page. He did not write names. He never did. Instead, he drew a simple mark, a curved line that suggested a path bending gently away from trouble. One mark for each dream repaired, one for Elon. The page felt fuller for it. Outside, clouds wandered lazily, casting shadows that moved like thoughts across the fields. The day did not demand attention. It allowed it. The blacksmith closed the ledger and returned it to the shelf, content to wait again. The bell chimed in the early afternoon, light and uncertain. The blacksmith looked up, already softening his breath. A child stood in the doorway, small enough that the doorframe seemed to curve protectively around them. Their shoes were dusty, their hair wind tangled, their hands empty. They held them behind their back at first, then let them fall to their sides, unsure. The blacksmith knelt so they were eye level. "You're welcome here," he said, as he always did. The child nodded, swallowing. "I lost it," they said. "I don't know where it went." "That happens," the blacksmith replied gently. He did not ask what had been lost. He knew better than to rush the shape of a thing. The child stepped inside, eyes wide as they took in the forge, the quiet fire, the resting tools, the lavender bundles. Their shoulders relaxed, just a little. The blacksmith poured a small cup of water and set it on the bench within easy reach. "Sit," he said. "We'll listen first." The child climbed up, feet dangling. The forge seemed to lower its ceiling, becoming smaller, safer. Sometimes the most important offering was simply showing up. The child swung their legs slowly, the rhythm uneven at first, then settling into something calm. They watched the cup of water as if it might speak, the surface trembling once before becoming still. "I used to know," the child said after a while, "what I wanted to be. It was clear, like a picture." The blacksmith nodded. He placed a small, smooth stone on the bench, not as a symbol, not as a tool, but as something solid and real. "Pictures fade," he said, "but the feeling behind them stays." He did not ask the child to close their eyes. He did not ask them to remember harder. Instead, he adjusted the fire so its glow reached the stone, warming it just enough to be noticed when touched. The child rested their fingers on it and sighed, not sad. relieved. Inside the glow, something stirred, not an image, not a plan, but a warmth that traveled up the child's arm and settled in their chest. Their swinging legs slowed. "I don't have to know right now," the child said, surprised. "No," the blacksmith replied. "You only have to be kind to the not knowing." The stone held the warmth for a long moment, then cooled, content to remain ordinary. The child smiled, a small private smile, and took a deep breath that felt like coming home. The child slid off the bench and stood for a moment, as if testing their balance in a world that felt subtly different. They picked up the smooth stone, turning it in their palm, then set it back where it had been. "I think I found it," they said. The blacksmith smiled, not asking what it was. "Then you know where to come back if it wanders again." The child nodded solemnly and stepped toward the door. The bell chimed, a brighter sound this time, clearer, like a note struck with confidence. Sunlight caught in the doorway, framing the child in gold for just a moment before they stepped back into the afternoon. The forge exhaled. The blacksmith returned the stone to its place on the shelf. It was cool now, indistinguishable from the others, yet the space around it felt kinder. Outside, the day leaned toward evening. Inside, the forge waited again. Late afternoon arrived quietly, bringing with it the long, slanted shadows that softened every edge they touched. Sunlight spilled through the forge doorway at a lower angle now, turning dust motes into slow drifting stars. The blacksmith watched them move, unhurried, each one tracing a small private journey through the air. This hour was a threshold, much like the doorway in the dreams he repaired. Not quite day, not yet night. A gentle leaning from one state into another. He stoked the fire just enough to wake it from its nap. The embers answered with a low glow, steady and calm. No sparks leapt. No urgency rose. The forge preferred this kind of flame, the kind that promised warmth without demand. Outside, footsteps passed, then faded. Voices carried briefly on the air, softened by distance and time. The village was easing toward evening, whether it noticed or not. The blacksmith set out 2 cups on the bench, though he was alone. Habit, perhaps, or trust. He poured water into the kettle and waited for it to warm, listening to the faint tick as heat found its way in. Somewhere between one breath and the next, the forge felt expectant, not tense, not restless, simply open, like a hand held out without asking what it might receive. The bell chimed just as the sun touched the hills, its sound stretched and mellowed by the thickening air. Dusk had a way of slowing everything, as if the world itself were easing into a long exhale. This visitor did not hesitate in the doorway. They were older than Aelin, older than many who came here, their movements careful but sure. In their hands they carried a small wooden box worn smooth at the corners, the lid held shut by habit rather than latch. They set it on the bench without speaking. The blacksmith inclined his head and waited. He always waited. When the visitor finally opened the box, there was nothing inside but a folded scrap of cloth and a faint glow, like the last ember of a fire thought long gone. "I don't sleep any more," the visitor said quietly. "Not because I'm afraid, because there's nothing left to dream." The blacksmith's eyes softened. He did not reach for the box. "Then we'll listen to what's still warm," he said. The ember glow flickered, responding to the nearness of the forge fire. Outside, dusk settled fully, and the first star appeared, small, steady, unconcerned with how long it took to be seen. The blacksmith drew the wooden box closer, not opening it further, not touching the faint ember inside. He simply rested his hands on either side, palms down, offering steadiness. The forge responded by deepening its warmth, the fire lowering itself to a respectful hush. "Embers don't shout," he said softly. "They wait." The visitor watched the glow, their eyes reflecting a tired light. Years had settled into their posture, not as weight, but as carefulness, the kind learned from carrying too much without complaint. The blacksmith lifted the scrap of cloth and laid it flat on the bench. It smelled faintly of smoke and old evenings. He placed the box at its center and drew the cloth's edges around it, not to hide the glow, but to cradle it. As he did, the ember brightened, not hotter, not stronger, just clearer. A memory stirred inside it, a porch at twilight, the sound of a familiar voice, the comfort of knowing someone would still be there when night fell. The visitor's breath caught, then eased, their shoulders lowered, the smallest surrender. "I thought it was gone," they whispered. "It rested," the blacksmith replied. "There's a difference." Outside, the last of the light slipped away, and night arrived without ceremony. Inside the forge, the ember held, patient and alive. The blacksmith worked slowly, as though time itself had softened its grip. He drew a shallow bowl from the shelf, clay, imperfect, its rim uneven in a way that felt intentional. He placed the wrapped box inside it and set the bowl near the fire, not close enough to wake the embers into flame, only near enough to remind them they were not alone. The glow responded by settling into a steady pulse, like a calm heart remembering its rhythm. The visitor closed their eyes, not tightly, just enough to rest behind their lids. The forge seemed to lean inward, attentive but unintrusive. Even the tools on the walls felt quieter, as if they had learned that this moment required no edges. "Dreams don't always return the way they left," the blacksmith said gently. "Sometimes they come back as something smaller, softer, but more willing to stay." The visitor nodded, a slow, thoughtful movement. The ember's light cast a warm line across their hands, revealing the fine map of years lived fully, carefully. Within the glow the memory shifted, not a grand vision, not a demand, but a simple image, sitting beside someone in silence, the comfort of shared warmth, the promise of another evening like this one. When the blacksmith finally moved the bowl away from the fire, the ember did not dim. It held its light, modest and sure. The visitor opened their eyes, and for the first time since arriving, they smiled. The visitor stayed a while longer, not speaking, not needing to. When they finally stood, the movement was easier than when they had arrived, as though something inside them had been set down gently rather than carried out. They took the bowl with both hands, careful and reverent. The blacksmith wrapped it in a thicker cloth, the kind meant for warmth rather than protection. "Let it cool where you sleep," he said. "It will know what to do." The visitor nodded and stepped into the night. The bell chimed once, low and calm, and then the road claimed them, folding their figure into darkness without swallowing it. The blacksmith closed the door and turned back to the forge as the fire deepened into its evening glow. Night had returned, familiar and kind, bringing with it the long hours that asked nothing but presence. He settled into his stool, listening to the forge breathe, ready for whatever the darkness might carry next. The bell did not ring this time. The blacksmith noticed at once. He lifted his head, breath slowing, senses widening the way they did when something quiet approached without sound. The door was open just enough to let a line of night spill across the floor, thin and blue. No footsteps followed, no shadow crossed the threshold. And yet the forge was no longer empty. The air had changed, thicker, softer, like the moment before sleep fully takes hold. The fire responded first, lowering itself without being asked, embers glowing with a listening warmth. The blacksmith stood, not startled, not afraid. "Come in," he said gently, to no one, and to something all at once. The night drifted farther inside, gathering near the anvil. It did not take shape the way visitors did. It did not carry an object or a name. It carried only a presence, fragile, hesitant, like a thought that had almost been forgotten. The blacksmith did not reach for tools. He did not speak again. He simply placed his hand flat on the anvil, offering steadiness. Slowly, within the night's quiet, an image formed, not visible, not solid, but felt. A dream that had lost its dreamer, a hope once shared, now wandering without a place to rest. "This happens," the blacksmith murmured. "Sometimes dreams outlive the ones who made them." The forge held the moment tenderly. The fire did not flare. The night did not retreat. Together they allowed the dream to linger, to be warm, to be held, if only for a while. Outside, the stars kept their gentle watch. The blacksmith remained by the anvil, hand resting on its cool surface, breathing in time with the fire. The presence in the room did not press closer, did not ask for more. It hovered like mist at dawn, present, fragile, uncertain of how long it was allowed to stay. He moved slowly to the shelf and brought down a small lantern. Its glass was clouded with age, its wick trimmed short. He lit it with a coal from the fire, then set it near the anvil, where its glow mingled with the embers. "This is only a place to rest," he said quietly, "not a place to belong." The wandering dream responded, not with sound, but with ease. The air lightened. The heaviness that had arrived without footsteps softened into something almost peaceful. In the lantern's glow, the blacksmith sensed images pass through the room, laughter from a kitchen long gone, a promise whispered beside a river, a future imagined together and never reached. They did not settle. They did not demand repair. They simply warmed themselves and moved on. When the presence thinned, the lantern's flame steadied. The forge returned to its familiar quiet, no emptier than before, no fuller, just right. The blacksmith extinguished the lantern and returned it to the shelf, grateful for the silence that followed. After the dream had gone, the forge felt hushed in a deeper way, like a room after a long-held breath has finally been released. The blacksmith knelt by the hearth and stirred the ash gently with a thin iron rod. Beneath the pale surface, warmth still lived, glowing softly, patient, and unafraid of fading. Ashes, he believed, were memories that had learned how to rest. He gathered a small amount into a shallow dish and set it on the bench, letting the residual heat rise like a quiet whisper. The smell was clean and faint, the scent of endings that did not feel like loss. In the ash there were no sharp edges, only softness shaped by time. The blacksmith warmed his hands over it, eyes half closed. He thought of all the dreams that had passed through this place, some repaired and carried away, some soothed and released, some given shelter for a single night. None were wasted, none were forgotten. Outside, a breeze moved through the fields, carrying the cool promise of late night. Inside, the forge held its gentle glow, content to remember warmth even as the fire slept. The blacksmith covered the dish and set it aside, a quiet archive of kindness, and returned to his stool. The night had reached its slowest point, the hour when even the stars seemed to drift more carefully across the sky. The forge rested in a state that was neither fully awake nor asleep, held gently between breaths. The blacksmith felt it in his bones, the soft loosening that came when the world trusted itself enough to be still. He dimmed the fire until only a handful of embers glowed, their light like distant windows in a hillside village. Shadows gathered, not to hide things, but to soften them. The walls felt farther apart now, as if making room for thoughts to stretch and settle. The blacksmith leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. In this hour, he allowed himself to drift, not into dreams of his own, but into the quiet awareness of having done enough for one night. His hands rested open on his knees, empty and content. Outside, an owl passed overhead, wings whispering through the dark. Somewhere, a sleeper turned in their bed and sighed, the sound carrying faintly through the fields. The blacksmith smiled. He liked to imagine that some small easing of the night had reached them, though he never claimed such things as truth. The forge breathed with him. The embers pulsed once, then steadied, holding their warmth without asking to be seen. This was the hour when nothing needed mending, only holding. The blacksmith did not sleep, not in the way others did, but in this hour his thoughts loosened and wandered gently. The forge, sensing the change, seemed to do the same. Wood creaked softly, stone cooled with a patient sigh, and the embers shifted as if settling into a more comfortable position. If a place could dream, this was how it would begin. The blacksmith imagined the forge remembering itself, not as a place of ringing iron, but as a shelter made of listening. He imagined the walls recalling every whispered fear, every relieved breath, every dream set down and lifted again. These memories did not weigh the forge down. They warmed it like layers of well-worn blankets. A faint breeze slipped through the door's narrow gap, carrying the scent of night flowers. The embers brightened in response, not flaring, just acknowledging the cool touch. Light and shadow played quietly across the floor, slow enough to be kind to tired eyes. The blacksmith opened his eyes and found that he was smiling, though he hadn't decided to. He rested his palm against the stone beside him, feeling the deep, steady calm beneath its surface. "Yes," he murmured, as if answering a question no one had spoken. "This is enough." Outside, the night held on, unbroken. Inside, the forge dreamed, softly, patiently, of all it had held and all it would hold again. A sound arrived so softly it almost wasn't there, a faint scrape, like cloth brushing stone. The blacksmith's eyes opened, not in alarm, but in welcome. This hour often brought such sounds, small and tentative, testing whether the world was still listening. He did not move at once. The sound came again, followed by a careful pause. Then the bell gave the quietest chime, barely more than a breath of metal. Someone stood outside, uncertain, gathering courage. The blacksmith rose and crossed the forge, each step slow enough not to startle the night. When he opened the door, he found a figure wrapped in a long coat, their face mostly hidden, their hands tucked deep in their sleeves as if holding something precious or fragile or nothing at all. "I wasn't sure you were real," the figure said, voice low and tired. The blacksmith smiled, gentle and unoffended. Most things worth finding feel that way at first. They stepped inside, and the door closed behind them with a soft, familiar click. The fire lifted its glow just a fraction, enough to offer warmth without curiosity. The forge adjusted itself, making room the way it always did. The figure did not sit. They stood near the door, breathing shallowly, as if ready to leave at the smallest sign of being too much. "You can stay," the blacksmith said before they could decide otherwise. "Nothing here needs proof." The figure's shoulders lowered just slightly. In the quiet that followed, something unseen loosened its grip, and the night deepened its calm around them all. The figure remained standing for a long moment, as if sitting might make their presence too real, too committed. The blacksmith did not rush them. He returned to his stool and sat, hands resting loosely, showing with his stillness that nothing was expected. The fire whispered, a sound like pages turning somewhere far away. At last, the figure stepped forward and removed their coat, folding it carefully over one arm. Beneath it, they seemed smaller somehow, as though the weight they carried had been doing much of the standing for them. "I don't know what's wrong," they said, the words barely above the fire's breath. "Only that something feels unfinished." The blacksmith nodded once. Unfinished things often feel heavier at night. He placed a simple wooden bowl on the bench and filled it with warm water. No herbs, no ash, just warmth. He set it between them, an offering without instruction. The figure dipped their fingers into the water and closed their eyes. Their breath slowed. The tension in their shoulders eased, not completely, but enough to feel the difference. "Sometimes," the blacksmith said softly, "we don't fix what's unfinished. We give it a place to rest until it's ready to finish itself." The water cooled slowly. The fire dimmed in sympathy. The forge held them both in a quiet that asked no questions and offered no answers, only room. The figure opened their eyes and looked into the bowl, as if expecting to see something reflected there. But the water showed only a blurred echo of firelight, shifting and soft, never quite forming an image. This seemed to ease them more than clarity would have. "I keep trying to name it," they said, "whatever this is, but the names don't stay." The blacksmith leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "Some things lose their shape when we name them too soon," he replied. "They need to remain unfinished for a while." He reached beneath the bench and drew out a piece of charcoal worn to a stub. Instead of marking the bowl or the floor, he set it beside the water and left it there. The presence of it was enough, possibility without insistence. The figure's gaze followed the charcoal, then returned to the water. Their breathing found a slower rhythm, one that matched the gentle pulse of the embers. In that stillness, the unfinished thing seemed to settle, not solved, not repaired, but no longer restless. Outside, the night deepened, wrapping the forge in a thicker quiet. The unfinished thing rested too, content to remain unnamed, held gently in the warmth. The figure stayed a while longer, hands resting on the edge of the bench, eyes soft and unfocused. The unfinished thing had not vanished, but it had shifted, settling like a bundle set down beside the road rather than carried on the back. The blacksmith noticed the change in the air. It felt lighter, as if the night itself had stepped closer to help hold what could not yet be understood. "You don't have to take it all with you," he said gently. "The night is good at carrying things halfway." The figure let out a slow breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Their shoulders dropped, and for the first time since arriving, they leaned just a little into the warmth of the forge. They stood when it felt right, not hurried, not delayed. The charcoal remained on the bench. The bowl of water had cooled, its surface smooth and untroubled. Nothing needed to be reclaimed. At the door the figure paused. "Thank you," they said, not with urgency, but with quiet certainty. The bell chimed as they stepped out, and the sound lingered longer than usual, as if the night were repeating it back to itself. Inside, The blacksmith returned to his stool. Outside, the road accepted the figure gently, carrying half the weight as promised. After the door closed, the blacksmith turned his attention to the hearth. The embers had thinned to a soft constellation of red points, scattered and calm. He knelt and drew the ash over them with slow, circular motions, not to extinguish but to tuck them in, like covering a child who had finally drifted into rest. The fire responded by quieting further, its warmth lingering without light. The forge dimmed into a deeper shade of night, where shapes became suggestions and corners felt far away and kind. This was an important moment. Fires, like dreams, needed to know when their work was done. The blacksmith washed his hands again, the water now cool, grounding. He dried them carefully, feeling the texture of the linen, the small certainty of cloth against skin. These details mattered. They anchored him to the present, to the gentle now. He moved through the forge one last time, touching nothing, adjusting nothing, only acknowledging. The anvil, the bench, the shelves of quiet tools, the space where visitors had stood, sat, breathed, and eased. Outside, the night had deepened into its truest dark. Inside, the forge rested, holding its warmth inward, content. The blacksmith sat and listened until even listening felt unnecessary. Silence arrived gradually, like a soft snowfall that did not announce itself. It gathered in the corners of the forge, along the rafters, beneath the bench where footsteps had paused and turned back so many times. This was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of completion, the kind that settles when nothing is being asked for anymore. The blacksmith felt it deepen around him. He did not resist it. He leaned into it, letting his breathing slow until it barely disturbed the air. In this quiet, even thoughts softened, losing their edges, becoming impressions rather than sentences. He stood and crossed to the doorway, opening it just enough to look out. The night lay wide and patient, fields silvered by starlight, the road a pale ribbon that seemed to lead not forward, but gently onward. Somewhere far away, water moved over stones. Somewhere closer, grass bent and rose again. He closed the door and rested his forehead against the cool wood for a moment, feeling the steady presence beneath his skin. This place, he knew, would remember the quiet long after he moved away from it. Places learned from the way they were treated. Returning to his stool, he sat as one sits at the end of a long, kind conversation, unhurried, grateful, at peace with what had been said and what had been left unsaid. The forge held the silence carefully, like a bowl, cupped in both hands. Time loosened its shape around the forge. Minutes no longer lined up in a row. They drifted like leaves on still water, touching, separating, then resting again. The blacksmith felt no need to follow them. The night was doing the holding now. He remained seated, eyes half closed, aware of the smallest sensations, the faint warmth rising from the hearth beneath its blanket of ash, the steady cool of stone through the soles of his boots, the quiet strength of the walls that had learned how to listen. Each sensation arrived without urgency, stayed without demand, and faded without regret. Outside, the sky deepened into its darkest blue. Stars shone more clearly now, untroubled by moonlight, each one a small promise that distance did not mean abandonment. The road beyond the forge lay empty, yet it did not feel lonely. It felt complete, as if it knew it would be walked again when the time was right. The blacksmith rested his hands together, fingers loosely intertwined. In this hour, he allowed himself a rare kindness, doing nothing at all. No waiting, no preparing. just being present in a place that asked nothing more of him. If a dream wandered past the forge tonight, untethered and tired, it would find the door closed but not locked, the warmth still lingering, the memory of welcome strong enough to guide it onward. The night breathed once, deep and even, and the forge breathed with it. Somewhere far beyond the hills, the night began to thin, not enough to be seen, only enough to be felt. The blacksmith sensed it the way he sensed everything else here, as a subtle easing, a gentle release of tension from the dark. He stood and stretched slowly, joints creaking in quiet agreement. The movement felt ceremonial, like acknowledging a partner at the end of a long dance. The forge answered with a soft settling sound, wood and stone adjusting together. He uncovered the embers just enough to check their warmth. They glowed faintly, faithful and calm. Satisfied, he covered them again, trusting them to remember how to wake when needed. Trust, he had learned, was one of the forge's most important tools. The blacksmith poured himself a final cup of water and drank it slowly. It tasted of stone and night and patience. Each swallow grounded him, preparing him for the return of hours and names and daylight responsibilities. Outside, the stars still held their places, but the sky behind them felt wider somehow, as if making room for what would come next. The world was not waking yet. It was only shifting its weight. The blacksmith sat once more, facing the door, content to greet morning when it chose to arrive. No sooner, no later. The first hint of morning did not arrive as light, but as trust, the kind that settles in the chest and says, "You have done enough. You can rest now." The blacksmith felt it, as he always did, like a gentle hand at his back, not pushing, just present. The forge held that promise well. He walked the length of the room one last time, footsteps soft, almost soundless. He paused at each familiar place, the anvil that had learned to listen, the bench that had carried many silences, the shelves that held tools shaped for kindness rather than force. He did not touch them. He let his gaze rest, and that was enough. At the doorway, he opened the door fully. The sky was still dark, but thinner now, like fabric worn soft by use. Cool air drifted in, brushing the lingering warmth without stealing it. The road beyond lay empty and patient, holding the memory of footsteps and the promise of more to come. The blacksmith closed the door again and leaned his back against it, eyes closed, breathing slow and deep. The forge wrapped around him, a quiet companion that did not need words. Somewhere, someone would wake soon with a dream less heavy than before. Somewhere else, a dream would find the courage to wait. The blacksmith did not need to know where. Knowing that it happened was enough. The forge kept its promise to hold, to warm, to let go. Light arrived the way a careful hand might, resting first on the edge of the world before moving any further. A pale ribbon slipped beneath the forge door, stretching across the stone floor until it reached the blacksmith's boots. It did not demand attention. It only announced itself by being there. The blacksmith opened his eyes and watched the light with a soft focus, as though looking at something that might vanish if stared at too directly. Morning had learned the rules of this place. It did not rush. It did not clatter. It waited to be invited. He moved to the hearth and uncovered the embers just enough to let them feel the change. They answered with the faintest glow, as if acknowledging the light without surrendering their warmth. Night and morning shared the space briefly, neither offended by the other's presence. Outside, a single bird tested the air with a quiet call, then fell silent, listening for the world's reply. The fields held their breath. The village had not yet stirred. The blacksmith poured fresh water into the kettle and set it near the coals, not to boil, not yet, only to warm. He liked the sound it made at this hour, the soft click and sigh that meant time is moving, but gently. This was the moment he treasured most, when the night had not quite let go, and the day had not yet begun asking questions. The forge glowed with a calm that felt earned. The light grew a little braver, spreading across the floor in a wider band, touching the legs of the stool, the edge of the bench, the quiet curve of the anvil. It revealed nothing new, only the familiar, made gentler by morning's touch. Even the dust seemed kinder in this light, floating lazily as if it had nowhere else to be. The blacksmith moved slowly, matching the pace of the dawn. He opened the window near the rafters just a hand's width, letting in cool air that smelled of damp earth and distant grass. It slipped into the forge and settled there, content to share space with a lingering warmth. From outside came the faint sounds of waking life. A bucket set down, a door opened and closed. Footsteps careful not to break the calm too quickly. The village was remembering how to begin again. The blacksmith rinsed a cup and set it upside down to dry. He straightened a cloth that didn't need straightening. These small gestures were not chores, they were acknowledgments. Proof that the night's work had concluded without needing a final word. The forge felt ready, not busy, not alert, just open, like a breath taken at the start of a long, manageable day. The blacksmith paused in the center of the room, letting the quiet settle one last time before it transformed into something else. The blacksmith stood for a long moment, hands folded loosely in front of him, as if listening for something that might arrive late. But the night had given all it meant to give. What remained now was quieter, lighter, meant to be carried rather than held. He lifted the ledger from the shelf and opened it again, not to add a mark, but to trace the older ones with his finger. Each curved line seemed to breathe beneath his touch, memories not of faces or words, but of release. He closed the book gently, trusting it to remember for him. Outside, the road brightened to a pale gray. Dew clung to the grass, turning each blade into a small mirror of the sky. Somewhere a cartwheel creaked, slow and familiar. The day was arriving in pieces, careful not to overwhelm. The blacksmith took a cloth and wrapped a small bundle of lavender, tying it with thread the color of early light. He placed it near the door, where the scent would greet anyone who entered, reminding them, before they even spoke, that this was a place where sharp things softened. He breathed in once, deep and steady, feeling the quiet strength that remained after a long night well spent. This, he knew, was what he carried into the day. Not exhaustion, not pride, but a calm that had learned how to last. The forge stood ready, warmed by memory, and open to whatever would come next. The first true footsteps of morning sounded outside the forge, measured, familiar, unhurried. Not a visitor seeking repair, not yet. Just someone passing by, grounding the day with their presence. The sound faded, leaving behind a sense that the world had fully turned its face toward light. The blacksmith felt it settle into him like a comfortable garment. He rolled his shoulders once, easing the last of the night stillness from his muscles, and allowed himself a small, contented smile. Morning work was different from night work. It asked less of the heart and more of the hands, and he welcomed the balance. He swept the threshold, brushing away dust and the faint trace of night air. With each pass of the broom, the forge seemed to brighten, not because of light alone, but because intention had returned. Still gentle, still slow, just awake. Outside, birds found their voices one by one, not in chorus yet, but in soft practice notes. The sound drifted through the open window and settled among the tools and beams, weaving itself into the forge's memory. The blacksmith leaned the broom against the wall and stood quietly, letting the morning finish arriving. Whatever dreams would come tonight would find this place ready again, listening, warm, and unafraid. Morning had fully arrived now, yet the calm of the night did not retreat. It lingered in the forge like a blessing that knew it was welcome to stay. Sunlight rested on the anvil, warming it just enough to remind the blacksmith of all the nights it had held more than metal. He prepared a simple meal, bread torn by hand, a little honey spread slowly, tea poured and left to cool until it was just right. He ate without distraction, each bite an act of presence. This, too, was part of the craft, learning how to receive the day as gently as one repaired the night. Outside, the village moved with growing confidence. Voices rose, carts rolled, doors opened wider, yet none of it felt loud. The forge stood slightly apart, not isolated, but protected, like a clearing where the forest learned how to breathe. The blacksmith sat near the doorway, watching dust drift through sunlight. He felt no urgency to begin, no list pressing at his thoughts. Whatever came next would come when it was ready. The calm stayed with him, not fragile, not temporary. It had learned the shape of this place and decided to remain. The blacksmith rose at last, not because he had to, but because his body remembered motion with affection. He crossed the forge and lifted the hammer from its peg. It felt familiar in his hand, balanced and patient, no longer heavy with old purpose. He did not strike iron. Instead, he carried the hammer to the workbench and set it down beside a small piece of bent copper, thin, tired, once part of something decorative, and now forgotten. He warmed it carefully over the coals, turning it slowly, letting heat travel through it evenly, kindly. This was how work had changed for him. With light taps, barely more than touches, he eased the copper back toward its original curve. Each sound was soft, a muted note that blended with birdsong and morning air. There were no sparks, no urgency, only progress measured in patience. As the metal relaxed, the blacksmith felt something similar within himself, a quiet satisfaction that came not from completion, but from care. This kind of work did not demand strength. It asked for listening. When he was finished, the copper rested easily on the bench, useful again in a small way, content with its shape. The blacksmith set the hammer down and smiled, knowing that even tools could learn new dreams. After the copper cooled, the blacksmith did not put it away at once. He let it rest where it was, catching the light, remembering warmth. Some things needed a pause between becoming and being. The forge breathed around him. With the door open, air moved gently through the space, entering cool and leaving warm, a slow exchange that felt like a living thing at rest. The blacksmith noticed how the scent of lavender had softened overnight, blending now with morning air and faint metal, no single note demanding attention. He sat again, not from tiredness, but from harmony. The forge had found its rhythm for the day, and he allowed himself to move within it rather than direct it. Outside, clouds drifted lazily. Inside, shadows shifted in response, never abrupt, never sharp. He thought of Elin, of the child, of the ember held in a bowl, of the dream that had come without footsteps. None of them were here now, and yet the forge felt fuller for having known them. That was the quiet truth of this place. Nothing gentle ever truly left. The blacksmith closed his eyes for a brief moment and breathed in deeply, then out, letting the forge breathe with him. For now, this was enough. As the sun climbed higher, the day did not sharpen. It softened. Light spilled into the forge in slow, shifting patterns, sliding along the stone floor the way water finds its own level. The blacksmith noticed how time felt different now, not stretched thin, not pressed tight, just flowing. He stepped outside for a moment, standing in the doorway with the warmth at his back and the open sky before him. The fields breathed in waves of green and gold. Insects hummed lazily, their sound a gentle weaving that asked nothing of the ear. The road lay quiet, holding no urgency, only possibility. When he returned inside, the forge welcomed him as if he had never left. He set a bowl of water near the window so the light could rest on it. Dust drifted above the surface, reflected as tiny sparks that rose and vanished. Even stillness, he thought, had movement. The afternoon passed this way, without announcement, without wait. The blacksmith allowed himself to be carried by it, trusting that the night would come again when it was ready, bringing with it whatever dreams needed mending, resting, or simply a place to breathe. For now, the forge floated gently in the day, untroubled and complete. As the afternoon leaned toward evening, the light grew warmer, thicker, as though it had slowed to enjoy its own passing. It gathered along the forge walls in honeyed bands, touching old stone and worn wood with a tenderness earned through time. Nothing cast a harsh shadow now. Everything was rounded, forgiving. The blacksmith noticed how the air changed its tone. Day sounds softened, the hum of insects deepened, distant voices lowered, footsteps became fewer and farther apart. The village was preparing, without knowing it, to hand itself back to night. He lit no lamps yet. There was still enough light to see by, and he honored it by letting it be. He sat near the door, hands folded, watching the road as it slowly emptied. Each moment felt complete on its own, not rushing toward the next. Inside the forge, the tools rested, as if aware they would be needed again, but not yet. The fire remained quiet beneath its ash, holding warmth like a promise, whispered, but not spoken aloud. The lavender by the door stirred once as a breeze passed, releasing a final breath of calm into the room. The blacksmith felt the familiar turning within himself, the gentle readiness that came when evening approached. Soon, dreams would stir. Soon, the bell would ring again. But for now, there was only this long golden pause, and it asked nothing of him but presence. He breathed in the light, let it settle, and waited for night to return at its own unhurried pace. Evening arrived without ceremony, as it always did when it was welcome. The long light thinned, drew itself back into the horizon, and left the forge wrapped once more in shadow, softened by memory. The blacksmith stood and lit the first lamp of the night, its glow low and steady, a familiar invitation rather than an announcement. He opened the door and felt the cool air brush his face, carrying with it the quiet of fields and the promise of returning dreams. The road darkened to a gentle line of silver, patient and waiting. Somewhere far off, a bell rang, another home, marking the hour. The blacksmith returned inside and banked the fire, coaxing it awake just enough to glow. The forge responded as it always did, settling into its listening posture. Tools rested. Stone held warmth. Lavender whispered its calm. He sat on his stool and folded his hands, ready not to act, but to be present. Tonight, as every night, he would repair what could be repaired, shelter what could not, and let the rest pass through with kindness. The forge breathed. The night leaned close. And so the story rests here, in the gentle circle of warmth and listening, where dreams are not sharpened but healed. Thank you for spending this quiet time with us at Nightfall Chronicles Channel. If this story helped you slow your breath or soften your thoughts, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, let your eyes rest. Let the night carry you. Sleep gently.